I remember when I first met Eric. I was on staff at Naramata Center. He was on his way, in 1996, he was on his way from Corner Brook, Newfoundland to take up his studies at Vancouver School of Theology, and he stopped off to become part of the summer staff at Naramata Center. I can still see him coming down the main street of Naramata, and I thought, who is that older guy amongst all those kids? The summer staff. You know, the summer staff was the single most important hire in the annual operations of Naramata Center. In the 1960s, when Naramata Center was languishing without money and a sense of direction, the newly minted executive director, they didn't call him that then, Ivan Cumming, and program head Daryl Odney were trying to figure out what to do with the place as they played pool in the basement of McLaren Hall. And they thought to themselves, children and youth, we have no money, but let's take every dime, every dollar, every amount, any amount of money that we have, let's spend it on the children and youth program. Parents, adults can take care of themselves. But if we can pay really fine staff to create an enriching program of community building and personal and spiritual development among children, they will grab their parents' coattails all year long to say, we want to go back. From that moment to the time that Eric was on the staff in 1996, that was the single largest expenditure of Naramata Center in its summer programs, was the children and youth program. When I left Naramata to take up a call to ministry, it was my advice to every congregation: spend what you have on children and youth. Spend what you have on children and youth. Miracles happened at Naramata Center. When I told our older son Jordan that Eric was joining the staff, being part of the ministry here at Lynn Valley United Church, he said, I so remember Eric. Do you remember, Dad, that year? That was the year that I was so bullied in elementary school. Do you remember that? And it was Naramata Center and the programs of the summer that saved my soul. I've become the person I am because of those programs. And Eric was a huge part of that. The center was a place of miracles, it really was. I've told you 100 times the story of my release from my lifelong fear of death through a program that I designed with Rochelle Graham and Vicki Lanny. Vicki Lanny was a student of Kubler-Ross. And she was, one of the sessions she offered was a session on miracles as people faced their troubling diagnosis, their life-threatening diagnosis. We were dealing with pastoral care, and how do we be with people in that? And do you remember the container, that pantyhose that came in an egg-shaped carton? They were called legs, right? Vicki started that session and she showed this carton and she said, do you know what a real miracle is? Vicki was 5'4" and shaped like a barrel. You got to know that. She used to say that about herself. I'm shaped like a barrel, I know. She would say, do you know what a real miracle is? That the contents of this box is going to fit on this body. That's a miracle. I'm sure each of us can conjure up an experience in your life where you can't believe it actually happened. It was a transformative experience. It was a moment when you might have said, wow, that was a miracle. I bet if we were to do a little sharing, you could swap stories with one another about the time when the hand of God touched your life and something changed and moved, and you can give witness to that. I gotta tell you, I think having Eric Hamlin as one of the ministers serving this place is a miracle. And the reason I say that is that Eric Hamlin's reputation for creating relationships among youth and young adults in BC is pretty high. He served in 2 congregations before his tenure as the coordinator of youth and young adult ministries in Vancouver South and Vancouver Burrard Presbyteries. You recall the time when 2 of our young people went off to their first youth event, and they came back completely transformed. Some of us will remember that, and we were blown away at how they were. Well, Eric was part of that leadership team. That relationship with those people remains this day. He could have gone anywhere BC Conference. But you know, something about the alchemy of Eric's experience, his emerging call to serve back in congregational ministry, and actually the risk-taking of this congregation, had a way to create the energy to find each other. That's what's happened. I think that's a miracle. Can I get an amen? Amen. At first blush, the story of the healing of Bartimaeus is a miracle story, at first blush. A blind beggar kicked to the curb by a culture who did that to people who didn't fit in the status quo. That's what happened. People who didn't fit the status quo were kind of kicked to the curb, and there's Bartimaeus at the side of the road. Funny how it goes. Bartimaeus recognized Jesus in the mess, recognized who he was, and called out to him. In a brief encounter with Jesus, he's able to see and follows Jesus on the way. Funny how that is. How people at the margins are able to recognize Christ when he comes close much more quickly than those within the status quo who aren't paying attention. Like the story we heard, those in the status quo are quick to want to silence those who are calling out from the margins. I love the Gospel of Mark and where this fits. We've got to remember that this story fits after the Transfiguration, when the disciples were on that mountaintop experience and they saw Jesus in a whole new way. Right? And then we've been reading stories about what has happened to the disciples in the wake of that experience. And today we read about blind Bartimaeus. This story is the final story before Jesus makes his way to Jerusalem, where the events of Jerusalem happen, where he is crucified, tried and crucified. Mark is a master storyteller. Mark wants his followers to see. See again. Look again. Throughout the Gospel of Mark, Mark wants his disciples to watch what Jesus is doing, see what's happening. In Mark's time, there were false prophets on the scene, proclaiming a gospel of popularity and prosperity. And Mark is reminding his followers all the time throughout the gospel, this is a gospel of suffering and death that God transforms. That's Mark's point. Even the women, at the end of Mark's gospel, the women are totally afraid. And the angel in the tomb says, go back to Galilee, where Jesus will meet you. Galilee, that's the place in Mark's gospel where Jesus began. Run it again, says Mark. See again, says Mark. And the last story before Jesus is crucified is someone whose name means Son of the Honorable One, at the side of the road, Son of the Honorable One, at the side of the road, sees what no one else can see. So what's going on in this story? I used the word alchemy earlier, right? Something of Bartimaeus, who knows what it is to be at the sidelines, knows what that's like. He's blind. Something of a crowd is heard on the street where he's sitting, and he's heard the stories of Jesus, and he recognizes that maybe, oh, this is him. He doesn't see him, but he sees him. And you know how we know he knows who it is? He says, Jesus, Son of David, marks code for this is the Messiah. This is the Anointed One. Bartimaeus knows it and calls out twice. The folks at the margin say, this isn't for you, Bartimaeus. This isn't for you. But Jesus hears him. Funny how Christ hears the ones at the margin. And then asks the pointed question, what do you want me to do for you? What's really true is that Bartimaeus already has it. In the saying, Jesus, Son of David, he already knows and can already see. When Bartimaeus says to Jesus, I want to be able to see, Jesus said, your faith has already made you well. And how does Bartimaeus say thank you? He follows Jesus on the path of suffering and death and resurrection. Miracles are an alchemy. Miracles are an alchemy of human energy, human agency, in partnership with God's energy, God's agency. They kind of show up together. That's what's going on in the story of blind Bartimaeus, right? There's human agency and God's agency, recognizing each other. And it's in the moment. It's not in some future imagined or some story remembered. It's in this moment that Jesus asks, what do you want me to do for you? In the miracle of human agency and Christ's agency, or God's agency, they come together in a mystery, in a moment, in an alchemy. Miracles still happen. They still happen. God is present with us today, looking to partner with you in a miracle. The thing for us is to show up. We have to show up. Bartimaeus showed up. We have to show up. Eric is showing up. We show up. God shows up. And it shows up in a miracle. A miracle of calling a minister to this place. A miracle of the rebuilding of this place. A miracle that 3 very different United Church congregations are building a church in our school in Guatemala. The alchemy that what's in the Lakes package actually fits on body. That's it. God shows up and we show up and miracles happen. Please pray. May we see again, O God, in the story of this man at the margins, may we see again. May we say yes and see and follow the path of suffering and the cross, whatever that might look like as we move into resurrection. May we be the kingdom people with each other. In Jesus' name.